The world we live in today seems to be walking on the edge of mystery, where ancient echoes rise again in modern shapes. Jonathan Cahn has often spoken about forces that humanity once thought were buried in myth, yet somehow they re-emerge under new coverings. The idea that ancient gods could be returning, not in their old statues or shrines, but as modern avatars is more than a story. It is a reflection of how cultures repeat cycles when they forget lessons from the past. What once demanded temples now demands attention through glowing screens, vast platforms, and powerful movements that grip the minds of millions. Think about it this way: in ancient times, civilizations bowed to deities representing war, desire, power, and knowledge. They built altars, performed rituals, and gave offerings. Today, few would claim to kneel before such idols, but the influence remains. It simply wears new attire. Where temples once stood, we now see towers of commerce, stages of entertainment, and digital realms where endless devotion is poured out. What if those ancient forces have not disappeared at all, but only found ways to inhabit modern culture? Avatars in plain sight. This thought brings us to one of the most striking aspects of history. The rise and fall of civilizations often followed their devotion to certain spiritual powers. The Mesopotamians bowed before Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, shaping how they lived and what they celebrated. The Greeks built their society around gods like Apollo, Athena, and Dionysus, each influencing law, art, and even politics. The Romans absorbed these deities, wrapping them into their empire's identity. And then, with the rise of faith in one god, the old shrines crumbled, and the voices of those gods grew silent. Or did they? Jonathan Cahn suggests that silence does not mean absence. Instead, it may mean waiting. Waiting for the moment when the door is opened again. The ancient spirits that shaped empires may have faded when their worship was broken. But when a society removes the foundation of faith, it creates a vacuum. And vacuums do not remain empty. They are filled. In this sense, what we see in today's world, the obsession with pleasure, the glorification of violence, the confusion of identity, could be more than human trends. They could be the avatars of old gods returning, cloaked in modern language. Let's take one example. In the ancient world, the goddess of desire was worshipped in temples where acts of indulgence were considered sacred. Today, that same spirit could be seen in the digital flood of images, entertainment, and messages that celebrate instant satisfaction. It doesn't stand in a temple carved of stone, but in the endless streams of content on devices. People don't call it a deity, but the devotion, the hours given, the sacrifices made, it mirrors the same devotion once given to idols. The goddess simply wears a new avatar. Or consider the god of war. Ancient cultures celebrated bloodshed as proof of strength, building monuments to their victories. Today, while society speaks of peace, it still glorifies conflict in countless forms. From the entertainment that celebrates violence to the rise of ideologies that thrive on division, the war god seems alive. It has exchanged the battlefield of swords for the battleground of minds, nations, and even families. The altar may look different, but the offering of strife remains the same. This does not mean statues are walking through the streets. Rather, it is the influence behind them, ancient powers, ancient patterns, finding ways to reappear. Jonathan Cahn points out that these forces often return more subtly than before. In ancient times, a person knew they were walking into a temple. Today, the temples are hidden. They may look like screens, arenas, financial hubs, or even cultural trends. People participate without realizing that the patterns echo something much older. That is what makes this return so powerful. It happens unnoticed. And here lies a crucial lesson: the past is never just the past. What once was worshipped openly can return silently. History shows us that when people abandon faith in truth, they eventually circle back to forces that once held them captive. The names may change, but the powers remain. just as avatars in digital worlds represent someone behind the screen. Modern culture may be an avatar for ancient gods seeking influence once again. The most mind-shaking part of this idea is how it connects the ancient with the modern. People often think mythology is just story, far removed from reality. Yet what if mythology was a coded record of spiritual forces that once held power? And what if those forces never died but adapted? Then mythology is not simply the past. It is a mirror of the present. This perspective changes everything. It means that when we see cultural shifts today, identity confusion, obsession with self, glorification of violence, addiction to pleasure, we may be witnessing more than sociology. We may be seeing the return of gods as avatars. If that is true, the question becomes, what happens next? In the past, whenever societies gave themselves fully to these deities, they collapsed. The Babylonians fell, the Greeks weakened, the Romans crumbled. Their devotion led to glory for a time, but always ended in ruin. So, if those forces are returning in new avatars today, what does it mean for us? Will history repeat itself, or can humanity learn before the cycle completes? The answer may lie in recognition. Once you see the pattern, you no longer walk blindly. Ancient gods may try to reappear, but awareness shines a light on their disguises. When people understand that what they worship, whether knowingly or not, shapes their destiny, they can choose differently. They can resist the avatar and instead turn to truth. That is the real challenge of our time, not to fall asleep while the past returns, but to stay awake and recognize the ancient shadows behind the modern glow. The world may call this progress, but progress without anchor is only drifting. The ancient gods were never satisfied. They demanded more and more from those who followed them. The same is true of their modern avatars. What begins as harmless entertainment, harmless devotion, grows into control, and control becomes chains. Jonathan Cahn's insight reveals that what appears as freedom may, in reality, be captivity. Recognizing that truth could be the first step to breaking free. In the end, this revelation is not meant to frighten, but to awaken. Ancient gods returning as avatars is a way of saying, pay attention. Look deeper than the surface. See the spirit behind the movement. Just as avatars in the digital world represent a hidden self, the cultural avatars around us may represent ancient powers pressing in again. But with recognition comes the power to stand, to choose differently, and to walk a path that breaks the cycle. That is the calling for this generation, to see what others cannot and to resist what others accept. For in doing so, they not only guard their own future, but reshape the destiny of nations. When we look closer at the world of today, something unusual is happening that mirrors the movements of ancient times. What Jonathan Cahn highlights is not only that these ancient gods may return as avatars, but that their influence can take hold of entire systems, politics, technology, culture, and even personal identity. It is not only individuals who can fall under these patterns. Whole nations can unknowingly echo the worship of forces they no longer recognize. In the ancient world, kings and rulers would dedicate empires to certain deities. Pharaohs, emperors, and chieftains built monuments not just as symbols of power, but as offerings. Their authority was tied to spiritual forces they believed would sustain their rule. Today, even though leaders rarely build temples to old gods, something similar happens. When political systems glorify power above truth, control above freedom, and image above substance, they may be repeating the same pattern. Instead of golden idols, they may be bowing to invisible avatars of the same spirits. Consider how technology fits into this picture. In ancient times, gods were believed to grant knowledge. Some were associated with fire, invention, and hidden wisdom. Today, we live in the age of digital fire. Technology has become the great revealer and the great controller at once. The internet, artificial intelligence, and global platforms hold more sway over daily life than emperors ever dreamed of. This is not to say technology itself is evil, just as fire is not evil. But the spirit behind how it is used reveals its direction. When it becomes a tool of obsession, pride, or control, it carries the mark of an ancient avatar wearing new skin. Identity is another powerful example. In ancient cultures, certain gods blurred the lines between male and female, human and divine. They were celebrated as forces of transformation, often challenging the natural order. Jonathan Cahn points out that these very patterns are resurfacing today. Modern society finds itself in confusion over identity, celebrating the breaking of boundaries as liberation. Yet, if we look back, we see that this is not a new phenomenon. It is an echo, a return. The avatars may use new words, new philosophies, and new platforms, but the core pattern is ancient. And every time in history when this pattern gained dominance, the society that embraced it eventually weakened from within. What makes this return more dangerous in the present age is its scale. Ancient gods once influenced single empires or regions. Today, through technology and global culture, their avatars can influence the entire world at once. A trend in one country can circle the globe in days, shaping millions of minds. A cultural shift that once took centuries to spread can now happen in a season. The influence of these ancient forces, therefore, is not only reappearing but accelerating. We also see the warlike spirit reemerging. In ancient days, nations glorified conquest, believing that bloodshed pleased their gods. Today, while modern people often say they long for peace, the spirit of conflict has taken subtler forms. Nations still race to outdo one another, not just in armies but in wealth, influence, and technology. Entire societies are polarized, with families divided and communities torn apart. Violence may not always take the form of swords and spears, but the intensity of division reveals the same ancient hunger for dominance. The war, God may no longer demand blood on altars, but it thrives in bitterness, hatred, and the tearing apart of unity. Even in economics, the same forces can be traced. Ancient gods were tied to prosperity, fertility, and wealth. People offered sacrifices believing their harvests would multiply or their treasures would increase. Today, wealth is still pursued with almost religious fervor. Towers of glass and steel stand where shrines once stood. The sacrifices are not sheep or cattle but time, integrity, and often family. People believe that if they give enough, the system will reward them. This is not unlike the ancient mindset. It is simply dressed in modern economics instead of ritual. Now, why does this matter? Because recognizing the avatar is the first step in breaking its hold. If people think these are merely random cultural trends, they underestimate their power. But if they see the ancient spirit behind them, they realize what they are truly facing. Jonathan Cahn emphasizes that this recognition is not about fear, but about clarity. To fight a shadow, you must first name it. To break free, you must first see the chains. History gives us a serious warning. Every time ancient gods took root in a society, they eventually demanded more than the people could give. They promised freedom but delivered slavery. They promised prosperity but led to ruin. Babylon fell. Greece fractured. Rome collapsed. Each had glory, but the glory was temporary because it was built on foundations of false devotion. If the same spirits are returning as avatars today, the lesson is clear: without awareness, we risk walking the same path toward collapse. But there is hope in this message. Just because forces return does not mean they must win. Ancient history shows not only the rise of these gods, but also their fall. When truth took hold, idols crumbled. When people awakened, temples emptied. The same can happen today. The modern avatars may seem powerful, but they are not invincible. Their power comes from the devotion given to them. If people withdraw their devotion, if they choose truth over illusion, the avatars lose their strength. This is why the message matters so deeply. It is not just about myths or symbols, it is about the battle for the soul of a generation. The gods that once ruled are seeking to return, not as marble statues, but as influencers of culture, politics, and even personal identity. They disguise themselves in movements that look progressive, in technologies that look neutral, in entertainments that look harmless. But when you peel back the covering, you see the same old spirits with the same old hunger. So what does this mean for us personally? It means we must ask where our devotion lies. Who or what do we give our time, energy, and heart to? Are we unknowingly feeding an avatar of an ancient god? Or are we anchoring ourselves in something stronger, something eternal? The decision does not only affect individuals, it affects nations. The course of civilizations has always been shaped by the spiritual forces they embraced. Ours will be no different. Jonathan Cahn's insight acts like a warning bell. The gods are not returning in myths. They are returning in movements. They do not appear as statues. They appear as ideas. They do not demand offerings of grain. They demand the devotion of hearts and minds. And the only way to stand against them is to recognize them for what they are. The return of the ancient gods as avatars is not a mythological idea. It is a living reality unfolding around us. The question is whether we will see it before it consumes us. And even more importantly, whether we will have the courage to resist it when we do. If the ancient gods have indeed returned as avatars in our time, then the greatest question is not simply how they influence society, but how we respond. Jonathan Cahn's warning is not only about recognizing patterns, but about living differently in the face of them. Awareness is the first step, but action is what determines the outcome. History may repeat itself, but it does not have to. Each generation is given the chance to either fall into the same cycles or break free. When we look at the way these avatars shape culture, the challenge can feel overwhelming. They are embedded in politics, technology, media, and even education. They influence what people value, how they think, and what they celebrate. For many, the temptation is to believe there is no way out, that these powers are simply too great. But that is exactly how the gods of old kept their hold. They convinced people that resistance was impossible, that devotion was inevitable. Yet history also shows us that idols fall the moment people refuse to bow. The same is true of their modern avatars. So how do we resist them in practical life? The answer begins in the small choices, because the avatars thrive not on force, but on devotion. They gain power when people give time, attention, and trust to them. For example, if the avatar of desire grows when people pour endless hours into content that feeds obsession. Breaking free begins by reclaiming those hours, choosing to step away from endless streams of distraction, and instead filling that space with what strengthens the soul. It is not only about saying no, it is about saying yes to something higher. The warlike avatar thrives when division and hatred are allowed to grow unchecked. Resisting it begins not on battlefields, but in conversations, relationships, and communities. Choosing peace in words, choosing unity over rivalry, is itself an act of resistance. Every time someone chooses forgiveness instead of bitterness, they tear down a piece of the altar built to that spirit. It may seem small, but history has shown that great powers fall when people begin with small acts of courage. Identity is another battleground. Ancient gods blurred lines, and their avatars today encourage confusion. Resisting them is not simply about debating ideas, but about grounding oneself in truth. Knowing who you are and living with clarity is an act of defiance against a world that thrives on uncertainty. When a person stands firm in their identity, they refuse to let the avatar write their story. And when enough individuals do this, entire cultures shift. Technology itself does not have to serve the ancient gods. Like fire, it can either burn or bring light. The choice lies in how it is used. If technology becomes an idol, an endless source of control, pride, or distraction, then it serves the avatars. But if it is used to spread truth, build community, and empower good, it becomes a tool against them. The same platforms that can enslave can also liberate, depending on how they are wielded. The key lies in conscious choice. The avatars feed on passivity. They gain strength when people accept culture without questioning it, when they follow trends without asking where those trends lead. Resisting them requires awakening the mind, reading deeply, reflecting carefully, and questioning the narratives of the age are powerful ways to dismantle their disguises. Once you see the pattern, you can no longer be deceived by it. Awareness cuts the strings that bind. But beyond individual choice, communities have a vital role to play. In ancient times, people gathered in temples to give strength to their gods. Today, when people gather around truth, they weaken the hold of false powers. Communities that build on shared values, that support one another, and that refuse to bow to cultural idols, become strongholds of resistance. They are like lights in the midst of shadow. And history shows that such communities, even when small, can reshape entire nations. It is important to remember that these avatars are not all powerful. They depend on the devotion of people. Without attention, they fade. Without sacrifice, they weaken. Without belief, they crumble. The fall of Babylon, Greece, and Rome proves this. Their gods seemed untouchable, yet once the people turned away, the idols were left standing in empty temples. The same will happen to their modern avatars if people choose differently. This is where hope shines brightest. The return of the ancient gods is not only a warning, but also an opportunity. It exposes the hidden influences shaping society and gives people a chance to confront them directly. Rather than drifting blindly into the same mistakes, this generation can see the pattern and break it. Every decision, every choice of devotion, becomes part of the battle. The final question each person must ask is, who or what will I give my devotion to? That decision determines whether the ancient avatars gain strength or lose it. It determines whether culture repeats the path of collapse or writes a new story. Nations are shaped by the collective choices of individuals, and individuals are shaped by the daily decisions of the heart. This is why Jonathan Cahn's message is so urgent. It calls each person to wake up and see what is truly at stake. The battle is not fought with swords or armies, but with awareness, devotion, and courage. The ancient gods may wear new avatars, but they are the same powers with the same hunger. They cannot be defeated by ignorance or passivity, but they can be resisted by those who see clearly, stand firmly, and choose differently. In the end, the greatest weapon against them is truth. Truth exposes disguise. Truth breaks chains. Truth sets people free from cycles that have bound civilizations for centuries. And when truth takes root, the avatars lose their power. Their return may seem unstoppable, but their fall is certain when people refuse to bow. The story of our time, then, is not simply that ancient gods are returning as avatars. It is that people have the chance to resist them, to see through their disguises, and to build a different future. That choice lies not in distant halls of power, but in the hearts of individuals every day. Each choice of devotion, each act of courage, each stand for truth writes a new chapter in history. So while their return may seem to echo doom, it also brings a call to awaken, to rise, to recognize that what seems new is actually old, and that what has fallen before can fall again. The question is not whether the avatars will try to return. The question is whether we will let them rule. And the answer rests in our devotion, our awareness, and our courage.